In the last video, I showed you how close the transmission cooler lines ran to the exhaust. One of them ran right next to the exhaust pipe, right by the transmission, and the other one ran right next to the headers. Now that I have them off, I'll clean them up and show you how I straighten them out so I can reroute them away from any heat. Back in number 1, the very first of this series or group of videos on the 53, I said the two criteria was safe and reliable. What I didn't mention was cheap. And as far as I'm concerned, cheap is way too expensive. I'm going to do everything I can on this build using the parts that either came off of the truck, or remanufacture them, make them workable again, which I really like to do, or if I really have to, I'll go ahead and spend some money on it. But I know most of you just have gobs of money and you would just rather buy pieces. Yeah, right. Anyhow, you'll see a lot of stuff in this build done in a way that you can save some money too. If I have to stop and make a tool to repair something, one of the projects that I'm working on, I'm more than happy to do that. Not only do I enjoy making tools and tooling, but it gives me another tool in my toolbox. There are many tools over the years that I made one for a specific job, and it could be 20 years later that if that is not the specific tool that I made, or that I made for another job, if it won't do the job that I want to use it on, it'll take very little modification, or it'll work as it is. So let's get on to straightening these tubes. After all three tubes were straightened, I came down under the truck to see what my options were for running the lines. And one of the options was to run it right beside the oil pan, but I would have to go up and over the starter motor, and that would take quite a bit of maneuvering, and it'd be hard to get measurements from under the truck. So what I've decided to do is to come past the cross member where the radiator sits and go into the frame rail and follow that back all the way. So I took a couple of pieces of aluminum welding rod and bent them up. That block you see there is just to weight the rods down so I could see what the path would actually be, and bent them up, and I think this scheme is going to work out just right. Here are the two pieces coming out of the radiator and then coming over, following the frame rail, and then making a 45-degree bend, and then we'll connect some straight pieces in there that will be tucked in under the frame. And now that we've got the small sample pieces done and they fit correctly, we're going to get on to the bending of the tubes. But first, there's a couple of things I want to talk to you about. The first one is the mystery of bending. It's really not any mystery. The only three things that you have to remember when bending any tube: you bend everything on the center line of the tube, and all radiuses are on center line radius. The three things that are premier are the radius of bend, the distance between tangents, and the degree of rotation between bends. So let's get to bending. Okay, so on the first one, the longer of the two, I have two 90-degree bends to make and one 45-degree bend on the end, and they all have to be in the same plane. So what I'm going to do first is set up my bender for 45 degrees. I get this mark right on the tangent of the tube, and then I'll pull this around until I think I'm just about at 45. And if you watch, this will spring back a certain amount. And then I can take my 45, set it on there. I'm not even close. So we'll come to, that's looking closer. Right about there is 45 degrees. So what I'm going to have to do is pull this handle until I take the spring back out, which is right about there, and I'm going to make a mark. Next, I'm going to go ahead and bring it all the way over to 90. Let the spring back go to right about there. Come until I get to my 90. A little bit more. Right about you have to remember to let the spring back go. So I'm going to pull this till I have the tension on it again and make a second mark. So now I know that each time I go to this mark is 45 degrees, this mark will be 90 degrees. So now I'm going to my second mark. Which is here. Make sure that my tangent point is lined up. And then I have to clock this to horizontal. Then I can make my second bend to that same mark. And then my last bend. Make sure I'm clocked properly, horizontal. Then I only go to 45 degrees. I'll be damned. I hit the stand for the light, for the camera. Okay, so there we go. There's one piece finished. I'll bend the short one, and then I will bend up the ones for the transmission, and then the ones to go through the chassis. And I think on the transmission, I'll have one that has some rotation between bends, and if I do, I'll show you that portion. So here we have the project complete, where it goes under the lower radiator hose. There is still clearance. Neither of the hoses touch the frame nor the bottom of the radiator hose, even though it is pretty close in there. And you can see those two little rubber pieces. I put those on there so I wouldn't be concerned with conductive heat, one tube to the other. If you remember, the whole purpose for this exercise was getting away from the radiant heat from the exhaust. It was my intent to run this whole line parallel horizontally, one side by side, but because of some of the constraints in the frame rail, I had to go parallel above and below. And here you can see the two tubes as they come out from the frame rail and make the transition over to the transmission. And here is the transition from the steel tubes coming from the radiator to the copper lines that I ran along the frame rail. And this is where they came out from the frame rail. That one tube I was able to just put a fitting on and run it right straight into the transmission, and the lower one I made a transition from the copper to the steel and ran it right into the transmission. And with that, the project is complete. So if you remember back in episode 1, I said that I pulled the 53 into the shop right around the 1st of September. And here it is, October 1st. So to do these last three projects, it's taken almost exactly a month. The next thing I'm going to do is put a makeshift single seat in, just get it in so I can drive the truck in and out of the shop. And as soon as I get that done and get some more time, probably the next thing that I'll be filming is repairing the door jamb, completely finishing the door, reassembling it, and then getting that back on the truck. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. See you later.